Hello, this is your host, Cheryl C. Jones, with a warning. This podcast contains true stories of individual genius that may inspire you to take action in your own life. Listener discretion is advised. Hello and welcome to Getting Simply the Best Results podcast. I'm your host, Cheryl Jones. I'm an author, a speaker, a podcast host, and I'm also a results coach. I work with small businesses and individuals to help them get past their financial and growth plateaus so they can achieve big results. Today, I have a very special guest and a dear friend, Matthew Pollard. Let me share a little bit about him with you. So Matthew is responsible for 5 multi-million-dollar business success stories in his home country of Australia, all before the age of 30. His humble beginnings, the adversaries he met along the way, and his epic rise to success are inspirational stories of how anyone with the right motivation and the right strategies can achieve anything they put their mind to. Today, he's a best-selling author whose book, The Introvert's Edge, has received endorsements from Harvard, Princeton, Neil Patel, Marshall Goldsmith, just to name a few. He's been featured by Fox, NBC, Fortune, Forbes, Inc., Entrepreneur, and CEO. And if that wasn't enough, he's the founder of Small Business Festival, which Inc. has named a top 3 national conference for small businesses. I've asked Matthew to join us today to talk about his genius and what it's taken to get him to where he is today. Please help me welcome Matthew Pollard, the man that Forbes calls the real deal, the rapid growth guy himself. Welcome, Matthew.
It's great to be here. Thank you so much.
It's always good to see you and always good to talk to you. So I'm just thrilled that you've agreed to do this today. I appreciate it.
Of course.
So, I know a little bit about your backstory, but everyone else doesn't. And so I want to know a little bit about your upbringing. I know you live here in the United States now, and you're from Australia, either that or you've purchased that lovely accent. I'm just kidding.
Gosh, if it was available for sale, I think it would go for a premium, wouldn't it?
I'm pretty sure it would. But tell us a little bit about yourself and your history and kind of a little bit more about those businesses that you're involved with, that all before 30.
Yeah, sure. I mean, my background, I really shouldn't have got to where I got to, especially that quickly. It was a little bit of luck and a lot of hustle more than anything. And luck actually came across as looking pretty unlucky until it ended up, there's this, if you look back on the events that happened, it was incredibly lucky. But leading forward into them, I was having a pretty tough time. So the interesting thing, I had a reading speed of a 6th grader in late high school. I had horrible acne. There's a point that I talk about in my book where a basketball hit me in the face and broke one of my pimples, and how embarrassing that was for me. And it's just, that was my childhood life. I was shy. I struggled to talk to my own friends, let alone anyone else. Luckily enough, I got diagnosed with this thing called Irlen syndrome when I was in late high school. And basically what it means is I put on a pair of glasses like this, and they've got, funny colored lenses, which of course didn't add to the whole non-teasing thing, right? But what it did mean is I could start the process of learning to read. And because of that, 2 years of hustle to get through school, I got into the top 20% of my state. But I was exhausted. I had no idea what I wanted to do. And my family could tell, A, that, the tank was empty. And B, if I hadn't gone into university not knowing what I wanted to do, I didn't know why I'd done the last 2 years. Doing it again, I would have just spun out. So, given how much motivation I have for the things that I do today, right? But it's all about what I know I want to achieve. And I wasn't there. So we all agreed that I was just going to take a job at a real estate agency. And no, I wasn't the guy out selling. I was the guy in the back office doing data entry. But my whole existence was, let's just spend a year spinning my wheels. My family wasn't well off, so I couldn't exactly sit on the couch and watch Oprah or, go traveling through Europe. I had to get a job. But that job, fastly came to an end. 3 weeks into my job, my boss, let me know that their office was closing down.
Oh.
And I'm out of work. And in Australia, we closed down for, nearly a month over Christmas. So no one's hiring. It's our summer break and Christmas break at the same time. And, the story really became, I took a job at a commission-only sales job. It was the only job I could get before Christmas. And, it was 93 doors before my first sale, but I went and taught myself how to sell watching YouTube videos. And, very shortly after that, I think this is important for a lot of people listening, because a lot of people think that when they hit adversity, especially if they have something like introversion, which everybody knows, if you don't have the gift of the gab, you just can't achieve sales success, right?
Right.
And what happens is we have that hustle mentality. We're just going to push through this hardship, or we run away, right? We avoid it. And so a lot of people, I was in a training group of 20, and I think 18 of them quit within 2 days. And so I was still there, but my teammate was hustling to just, I'll go and see more doors. I was rushing home after 8 hours of selling to go and spend 8 hours watching YouTube videos and practicing. 6 weeks later, my boss pulls me into his office and he said, Matt, we're a little bit blown away by this. Remember, I was the quiet guy, so I handed in my paperwork downstairs, and then I would go in to see all the boisterous salespeople talking about how hard it was getting in the market. Turns out I was the number one salesperson in the company.
Oh.
I got it down to the fact that I was closing a sale on average on every 3 doors. And it was a regimented process. To me, the variability and inconsistency, I was able to systemize out. And because of that, I became a rapid success. They gave me a team. And of course, just because you get given, you're good at sales doesn't mean you can manage, right? So I had a team of 20 of my own, and they all quit. 18, all of them quit within like a day and a half. And it was just, I was terrible at it. So back to YouTube, learned to manage. And, I promoted 7 times within 12 months. And then I went and started my own business, which was a telecommunications company. It was all I knew. And, less than a year later, it was, turning over $1 million a year. And a couple of years later, we got an award. I won the Young Achiever Award in Melbourne as because we founded the largest brokership in the country for business-to-business cell phones. And, fast forward a decade, and I've been responsible for 5 multi-million-dollar success stories.
Wow. Amazing. Absolutely amazing. That you've gone from this introvert, self-contained person to being able to sell something every 3 doors. That's amazing. So my immediate thought, because we've all heard it's all about the numbers. Is it all about the numbers?
No, not at all. So firstly, we were just talking beforehand that I just finished my second book. Mm-hmm. And I talk about networking in the second one. So the first one talks about sales, the second one talks about networking. And in both books, I say the same thing, but it's even more obvious, I think, in the world of networking, that the world of networking really has 2 groups of people, right? You have the transactional networkers that literally will walk from person to person in the room. And to me, it's terrible to see it. It feels like speed dating. Are you interested in me? No. Are you interested in me? No. Terrible. And then you get these other people that are determined not to be like that, but they don't really go in with a plan. So they're just aimless. They end up talking to their friends or talking to one person, and they walk out going, no one has any money to hire me. I was talking to the wrong people. I just wasn't lucky today, right? And that's why I see salespeople do the same thing. Oh, I wasn't lucky today. I wasn't lucky today. What do you mean luck? I believe that you can create your own luck. And I believe that because preparation to me is the key to luck. If you prepare well and you systemize, your chances of being lucky are higher because you are able to do more with what you're given and your focus is laser sharp. So for me, when you look at the numbers game, absolutely. One day it was 93 doors. And if I had have just let that continue, I probably would have got one, I would have got marginally better maybe. So it would be 85 doors and then 76 doors and then back to 85 and then 73. And today I was lucky. I got one on my first door and then tomorrow back to 105, right? So that is the same as what I consider transactional networking, right? Gotcha. Now, obviously the aimless version in the sales world is they just quit, right? Because it's not going to work, right? But if you have a structured system and process, then you increase the chances of the success in every door, right? So, I didn't get down to 3 doors straight away. It was 93, then it was 78, then it was 46, and then it was 27, and then it was, 21, and then I tried something and it didn't work and I was back to 31, and then I was like, okay, and then I got it down to 18, and then 9, and then, 8, and then 3, right? That was the average. And when I'm saying average because, you can't, obviously there's a little bit of luck in who you speak to involved.
Certainly.
However, that when you're speaking to 6 or 7 people, you can waste all of your time talking to a non-decision maker because you don't know how to qualify a person.
Mm-hmm.
You can spend all of your time arguing with a client about why they should hire you, or going and having a coffee and crying a little because they didn't see your worth, when you should have just told a story and that would have changed everything. So the reason why I don't believe in this concept of the numbers game, I mean, yes, you have to pick up the phone and call people. Yes, if you're a cold caller, you have to walk door to door. And yes, if you're a business owner and you're not networking or trying to find customers in any way, shape, or form, it doesn't matter how great your system is. If your head's in the sand, you're not going to get customers. Right. However, I would prefer to do more in one networking event than I would in the next 20 by having a great system, because then I don't have to go to the other 19. Right? So the goal for me is to really reduce the heavy lifting with what comes with that numbers game hustle, right? And I think these days especially, there's a lot you can do to remove that heavy lifting in both messaging, structured process, and also automation to do the follow-up for you in a lot of ways. But if you do all of that, then all of a sudden it becomes, in a lot of ways, fun. I mean, I love doing what I do. I enjoy, right now, I'm an introvert. So at the end of this, I'm still going to be tired, but it doesn't mean that I didn't enjoy it. And if people are listening and they feel like, I believe, at least I hope, most people think I'm quite well, I'm articulating myself correctly. Mm-hmm. And the reason for that is because while you and I had a conversation, I said, ask me any question you want because you really can't catch me out anymore. My first interview, gosh, I had all the questions they were going to ask me. I practiced my answers, but I've done over 100 of these now, right? So there's really not much you can ask me that will catch me out, and something that I don't have a prepared answer for. Because even though the question you ask is slightly different, I'll say, okay, well, here is a story or something that I feel like is similar to that. Let me start explaining that. And then what I'll do is I'll tailor that to your unique question and then hammer it home with a moral. As an introvert, that takes the pressure off. Now, podcast interviews, funnily enough, I see people do the same thing on these. They're so transactional and salesy. So they're like, can I talk about my products? Can I talk about my products now? When do I get to mention my products? And that doesn't work either. Mm-mm. But then they'll say, Matt said, I heard Matt on a podcast, and he said, do podcast interviews. It's a great way to find clients. And it is, but only if you act completely disinterested in that and give great value and tell great stories. And then somebody will be like, you know what, I like that person. The problem is people go on and all you hear is I, can you buy from me now? And that is not the way to do it. So as an introvert especially, who hates to self-celebrate in a lot of ways, and while we should do that more, it's not our nature to do that. Right. We need to realize that if we just take a step back and say, okay, this is something that makes me uncomfortable. And how is it that I can go about systemizing this, processing, putting it in a process, a series of steps that will add consistency to something that feels unpredictable. And if you can script a sale that has so much psychology and steps, you can kill it networking doing that. And, podcast interviews is even easier in a lot of ways because at least you're talking about your topic matter. So the whole framing that I want people to have is understand there is a system. I got interviewed by the Chicago Tribune about how to prepare for Christmas and, with the work Christmas parties. And I have regimented systems for that. If you Google my name with the Chicago Tribune and you've got a big office party to go to, or you're trying to prepare for Christmas time and you're a little bit worried about going to all those office parties or even family occasions because it drains you, Google that article. Again, I systemize and, work through a series of steps, even when I'm doing social occasions like that.
That's kind of cool, actually. And like you said, it reduces anxiety and worries, kind of thing. I wanted to back up and ask you about the story process because, I know that I've heard a number of your stories in the past, and because I know you and I've heard you speak and so forth. And, in that kind of networking or social situation, are you like sitting down one weekend and going, okay, what are all of my stories, and writing them out and trying to, simplify them down to, 75 words or 100 words or whatever. What is your, if you will, share with us, what is your process for building your stories, because I mean, I have lots of stories, but half the time I forget them. I end up, I'm in that networking situation that you described, and I'm standing there and all of a sudden I'm like mesmerized at what they're talking about. And I'm like, and they go, and what do you do? And I'm like, I don't know. I forgot. What's my story? Or what, so how do you, tell me about how you make that work.
Sure. So, I mean, the first thing to help people understand why, I mean, use the word mesmerized, and I think that's a really good word for what a story does.
Mm-hmm.
And there's some real science behind that. So firstly, there is a lot of brain chemistry that changes when a story is told, right? So firstly, it short circuits the logical mind and you speak directly to the emotional mind. Now, if you don't know what the real difference is, the logical mind's the part of the brain going, that won't work for me. I'm not sure if that's going to fit. Do I have time for this? Hang up, or, I've got other people to talk to. The emotional mind doesn't do anything but listen to a story. It literally short circuits the logical brain and goes, story time, and it just listens. Like, that's just the way the brain functions. Now, when you hear a story, you don't listen to any of the logical facts and question any of it. You just listen to it for the moral and see if it applies to you. So if the story is about somebody that you worked with, just like the person you're speaking to,
mm-hmm.
and how you worked with them and how you got them to a great result, then that person's going, oh my gosh, I need what that person has. I need what Wendy has. I need what Jim has. I need what, Whitney has. And because of that, they're going to be more inclined to hire you, right? Because a story is not, and let's classify this, it is not a case study or an eyewitness CNN account of what happened, right? That is a one-dimensional yuck story,
mm-hmm.
and it won't engage people, right? Now, you think about stories that we tell all the time. I mean, everybody listening, if you've got a boyfriend, girlfriend, husband, wife, think about the story that you told the first time you told the story of how you met your partner. Okay, it was bulky, it probably had some parts that bored people,
mm-hmm.
and it probably had some really exciting parts, but they could be better, right? So you made it better. You removed the bulky parts, and you said, maybe I won't tell that this time. And the other parts, you might have even embellished a little bit. But over time, it becomes this theatrical masterpiece, doesn't it? I mean, I say this, my wife says that, we hold hands, and we say this together, that's how we met. Mm-hmm. Now, in our personal lives, we say these really robust stories. In our business lives, it's like, customer wanted this, so we gave it to them. Horrible.
Yeah,
right?
horrible.
So, and that's why they don't engage. And that's why a lot of people are like, no, I've told stories, and people are always questioning my stuff. You didn't tell stories. You gave them a bullet point list of facts that had a chronology of what a story has. And that is not going to stimulate the neurons in your brain that it needs to create to short circuit the logical brain.
Gotcha.
The second thing is, when you tell a story, the parts of our brain that experience it, can't tell the difference between whether it's really happening to us or not. Right. So at the end of the story, we feel like we've developed rapport with someone. And because of that, because we feel like we've had a shared experience, see what happens is when we tell stories, this thing called neurocoupling happens. Our brains actually synchronize and we live through the story. And by the end of it, we believe that we've had that experience, or at least we've lived those feelings and those emotions.
Sure.
It's why when we're watching a horror film, we get scared for the person. Like, we know what's happening in the movie, but we get scared, right? So all of those reasons are playing through when you tell a great story. And then the real powerful one is people remember 22 times more information when embedded into a story.
Yeah.
So because of that, when you tell a great story, people will remember what you said as opposed to random facts. An example you've seen me make on stage is I'll ask somebody in the audience to remember 3 things at random. And I'll say, can you do me a favor? Can you remember, and I pretend I'm thinking, and I say, chairs, porridge, and beds. And then I'll say, do you have those? And they're like, yeah. I'm like, all right, now I don't want you to write them down, but a year from now, I want you to tell me exactly what those items are. What do you think your chances are? Not a chance in the world. Especially the order, right?
Right.
But then I say, well, what about Goldilocks and the 3 bears? Could you tell me that story? Absolutely, right? She sat in some chairs, she ate some porridge, and she slept in some beds. You don't know all of the details, but you know the general gist. Why? Because it was embedded into a story. Like, you probably can't even tell me what you had for dinner 4 nights ago, but you can tell me what time, Cinderella, had, everything, had to go.
Yes.
So the focal point for me is stories work for a lot of scientific reasons. However, most people only focus, and I think I actually have an example template here. So if this is a video podcast, people will actually be able to see it. If not, I can give it to you. You can put it on the show notes or something.
Sure.
But the framing of a great story really fits into 4 quadrants. Now, the first one is the problem, right, that the person has. Now, usually somebody says, well, they had this problem, so then we gave them this. That's not an explanation of the problem. You have to, and I always talk about problem from 3 specific quadrants, right? So you have real cost, i.e., what is it really costing me? Opportunity cost, what am I missing out on because of this specific problem, right? Maybe I can't get promoted because I haven't had the right personal development. Maybe I'm missing out on referrals because my customers don't like some of my team members. Maybe I'm not getting my bonuses, or maybe I might get fired because of a technology overhaul that perhaps didn't go so well, right? Now, and then you've got the third one, which is the emotional cost, which is where all the money is, right? How am I feeling? Who hates me? And how does that affect me? And how do I feel about it? Those are the 3 quadrants for problem. Then and that is where I would always suggest you spend about 30-35% of your time. Now, most people spend maybe seconds there. Then you talk about the implementation, right? So your implementation is, explaining what you did, but not saying, I did this, I did this, I did this, I did this. You say, from our very first session, David realized, right? Make it about them, because networking, sales, everything, business should never be about you. When I speak from stage, it's always about my audience, not about me, right? And actually, a good friend of both of ours, Tom Singer, the first time I delivered my presentation, and I know this from sales, I know this from networking. It's funny how when we do something new, we make different mistakes, right? I started talking about my personal story because I felt like I needed to tell people why I deserved to be there. And they're like, people can read that from your bio, he said. He said, tell them about your other stuff and then humble yourself by telling this story about yourself and your acne and things like that. That transition meant that no one heard the word I forever. And then the story was about their belief that it wouldn't be possible for them, making them feel like they could. And it was a wonderful piece of advice. And, between Tom and Jim Comer, who's another personal friend of ours, probably is the reason why I'm one of the top 50 speakers in the world right now. And the framing was because it just wasn't about me. And that's the thing that I would suggest in the implementation, make it about the person, the hero of the journey, right? By the way, that person should have a name, right? Because you can't feel the problems of a company or a position, but I can feel Cheryl's pain. I can feel Matthew's pain, right? That you can feel it all. So then you do the implementation. I would only spend maybe 20% of your time talking about that, and don't teach. Leave your fire hose of information at home. Just, share how the implementation was done for that specific person, right? Leave the brochures away from the table, right? Then move into the outcome, right? How did it affect them were the real cost saved, right? Was the opportunity cost realized? And how do they feel now, right? Emotional elements. Mm-hmm. Again, 35% of your story there. And then there's this thing called a moral of a story that everyone tells when you're watching fables and things like that. But for some reason in business, we think everybody should just know. Well, everybody has different perspectives. They have different beliefs, different values. I mean, what they get from what you have to say may be determined on the fight that they had with their wife in the morning or the breakfast that they had that didn't have the right flavored milk. So you can't assume that they just get it. So what I always suggest is that you explain the moral, and you explain it and target it specifically to their unique problem concern that they highlighted that they had. So make it relevant to them. Now, by doing this and having prepared stories, you have this ability, and I know you work with a lot of lawyers, and gosh, they bulk things up. I work with a ton of lawyers and accountants, and you sit down in the meeting for them, and at the end, you just want to say, okay, just do it, because you're overwhelmed. Or you say, and how much is that going to cost me? Oh, that's more expensive than this one. I didn't understand either of you, so I'll just go with the cheaper one. So the moral really needs to be hammered home to make it applicable to them. Now, once you have that story structure, all of a sudden stories make a real difference. I worked with a big technology company actually, and I've got an NDA, so I can't say the name, but it was a multi-billion-dollar technology company. And I got told that I got asked if I could write a couple of stories for their organization. By the way, multi-billion-dollar company, we wrote 3 stories, right? That's it.
That's all I have, 3 stories.
That's the thing, because when you first start, you should focus on a really finite niche. And what I always say is pick a niche. Once you know that niche, then you work out what the 3 major problems, wants, or needs that niche has. And then once you do that, then it makes it super easy to say, okay, well, I need a story that covers each one of these problems, right? So it means all you need is 3 stories. And truthfully, I mean, I earn probably 70% of my income from just one. So, don't get courageous. Just create one, learn it, and then, learn to tell it well and use it in every sales conversation, every meeting, and you'll be blown away at the results. But when I was doing these interviews to write these 3 stories, I had 5 people sit down with me for 45 minutes over a Zoom call. And I really interrogated them for the details of the story, because every person knew something different about, technology is complicated, right? And they made it really complicated. So for 45 minutes, I interrogated them on all the answers. And then I told them back to them. I said, I just want to make sure I got this right. And I told them the story back in about 45 seconds. And they were like, how did you do that? It was a really compelling version. It wasn't great, but it was much more compelling than what they told me. And I was like, through the exact framework that I just suggested to you, what you guys just learned on the podcast. But the thing was that I said, well, there's some pretty significant things missing. Firstly, what's the name of the person? And he's like, I don't know. I'm like, it's David. Okay, well, that's important because, the story was that they decided to go they moved their technology into the cloud. And I'm like, was he hoping to get promoted from this? Was he scared about it going wrong and him losing his job? Like, what happened? By the way, that brings me to my second question. Why did he want to move into the cloud? He'd been considering doing this. He'd been targeting for over a year, it sounds. Why did he want to go to the cloud? Well, it turns out the server of their government organization crashed just before Christmas. Oh. And they couldn't run payroll during the biggest spending season of the year. He was the guy that ruined Christmas for the entire organization, the whole government, because none of them, sure, they could use credit cards and stuff, but but truthfully, some people had rent to pay and couldn't pay it, right? Because you got to pay for that stuff in cash, right? Which means they were using their credit card allowance to buy presents. Sorry, that they were going to use to buy presents to pay for rent, right? They were, a lot of people live hand to mouth, and he also had to bring his entire staff in over the Christmas period to do that. And he was the guy that, was doing that. His family had to live with the fact that he may lose his job after all of this. Can you imagine feeling responsible and worried about not having a job after Christmas? And what job are you going to get when you're not going to get a reference from the guy that ruined, because he ruined Christmas, right? So I said, how are these parts of the story not in there? You've got to create a robust story. The problem that he had was not that he wanted to go into the cloud or his want or need. It was that he was the guy that ruined Christmas, and he wanted to make sure he was never going to be put back in that situation again. And now he sleeps easy at night, knowing that problem won't reoccur. He was actually, celebrated by his boss for his way he handled the situation and then migrated it so that they don't have that risk anymore. And, now, he's looking like getting a promotion as opposed to getting fired. So what's the moral of the story? If it ain't broke, don't fix it is not the psychology that you want to have with your technology, right? So the concept of a story, how much did I actually talk about the technology, by the way?
Not at all.
Not at all. He went to the cloud. That's all we learned.
Cloud, that was it, right.
Mm-hmm. But that's all I wanted you to know. Mm-hmm. Because who cares whether it's a good cloud or a bad cloud? I don't even really need to know what a cloud is. I just need to know cloud is safer than no cloud. That's all I need to know. Right? So the concept is, right, and yes, we did embellish a little bit on how easy he found the transfer process and how it was seamless and, next week it was all resolved or whatever. But the concept is, if you can build that framework. I had one girl who told this amazing story of this girl that was at the gym and was really struggling to lose weight. So she quit the gym. And, so this salesperson called her back and convinced her to do a training plan. And then, so she came back and she lost her desired weight. I said, oh, terrific. Firstly, what was the person's name? Secondly, why was she trying to lose weight in the first place? Turns out she was trying to get pregnant, and she couldn't get pregnant because she was overweight. So she went going to the gym and then failing. I'm like, do you think she felt like she was failing her whole family?
Yeah.
Absolutely she did. I said, did she get pregnant after she lost the weight? She did. How are her parents feeling about that? Yet none of this was part of the story. This is what I mean. If you can create these robust stories, everything shifts.
Totally makes sense. Totally makes sense. And I was totally mesmerized again.
Well, if you can teach somebody something so complex, well, story's not really complex, but there are 4 steps, and psychology tells us that most people can only remember 3 things, right? If you tell them off the cuff, and even then, not a year later, like we proved with chairs, porridge, and beds, right? So I just gave you 4 steps, but because I framed them inside a story to help elucidate them, by doing that, all of a sudden, you'll actually remember it a lot more. And, what happens is people sit down at a networking event and say, oh yeah, but I couldn't tell a 3-minute story. That's not true. I've worked with commercial real estate agents that couldn't keep a C-level executive on the phone for more than 8 seconds before hanging up. Now they say, they get an objection, they transfer into, I perfectly understand, the last thing I want to do is waste any of your time. However, which is called an objection handling cushion, i.e., I understand what you're saying. I don't want to waste your time. I get that you're busy. However, not the word but. For the husbands at home, go home and say, dear, you look beautiful in that dress, but, and see what happens. Trust me, the word however is very different. It's an additional term. It doesn't mean everything I said before that I didn't mean. And then they tell a story, and they were keeping C-level executives on the phone for 2.5 minutes sometimes. I mean, their business went from $2 million to $3 million in 2 months, and they were a $10 million company by the end of, within 12 months, through just telling stories as opposed to pitching on the phone. Amazing. And that's a cold call. I mean, imagine applying it to a consultation where somebody booked a meeting with you to talk about your services.
Exactly. And there's so many people that need to have build that kind of response or connection and rapport with people by having that one-on-one conversation. This is fabulous. So I want to take you've shared so much information with us, and I would love to have you back. And if you would be so willing, I want to talk more. There's so much more that I want to ask you about. So do you think you'd agree to that?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love that.
All right. So just want to thank all of our podcast listeners for joining us today, because this is just such a terrific conversation in terms of the information that we're learning and that Matt's sharing with us today. I want to make sure that before we go that I thank Matthew for being here, first of all. Thank you, Matthew. And I want to know, what's the title of the new book, because I need to go out and buy it.
Well, it's actually called The Introvert's Edge, the same title as the first book. So it's going to be a series of books.
Oh, awesome.
So, luckily enough, I mean, the first book, it was listed by Book Authority as the #2 book ever written for introverts. And Sales Hacker has listed as one of the top books ever written in sales. HubSpot has as well. So it's just done really, really well. But the goal for me is to really open the minds of introverts to believe that they can, they're not second-class citizens. They can achieve amazing things. They just need to understand that what they need is a system. By the way, extroverts have their own disadvantages. Some might say that they're not the best listeners. We need a system, but then we've got these amazing powers of listening and empathy. So, the next book is just called The Introvert's Edge to Networking. It'll actually be out in January of 2021. Publishing takes a long time. So it just takes a long time. But for those other people that are listening, I mean, lawyers need to sell every day. Anyone in business needs to sell every day. One of the things, my publisher hates me when I say this, but you don't need to buy my book. If you go to the introvertsedge.com, you can download the first chapter. And in the first chapter, it actually outlines the first 7 steps of the sales process. If you do nothing more than grab what you currently say and put it in under those 7 chapter headings, first thing will happen is you'll realize there's a whole bunch of things that you say that don't fit. Throw those out. You shouldn't be saying them to customers. Then you'll realize there's some gaping holes in asking great questions and telling amazing stories. And not the stories you currently tell, but really amazing ones. And then you'll realize that some of the stuff that don't fit, is the thing where you feel like you need to educate the customer well. They don't need to be educated. They just need to know you worked with someone like them that had a similar requirement and that you gave them an amazing result. So if you do nothing more than fill out those 7 steps in your process and actually use those out in the real world with customers, I mean, you'll double your sales in 60 days.
Awesome. And I've read The Introvert's Edge and I love it. I read it and I'm normally a paper person, but I read it on Kindle and it was like, oh, I want to highlight that. So I did not get my highlighter out, but I did highlight on Kindle, but I really enjoyed it. So I can recommend that one highly. I can't wait to see what the next one has to say. So in closing this segment, we're going to have Matthew back. So hang in there. And we've got more to talk about. But I want to thank you all for joining us today. And please do us a favor. Subscribe, hit the subscribe button, give us all 5 stars, comment, tell us how we're doing. We'd really appreciate it. Until next time, thanks for joining us. I'm Cheryl Jones, your host of Getting Simply the Best Results podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a 5-star rating and don't forget to hit that subscribe button. To connect with me, Cheryl C. Jones, you can find me on LinkedIn and Facebook by my name. Don't forget that Cheryl is spelled with a CH, and be sure to include my middle initial, the letter C. You're welcome to email me at cheryl@simplythebestresults.com or visit my website of www.simplythebestresults.com for more information and inspiration. This has been a GSTBR production, created and hosted by me, Cheryl C. Jones, edited by Brandy Hockaday, and produced by Kathy Holscher. New episodes are available each Thursday on Apple, Stitcher, Spreaker, Google, and many other podcast directories. Thanks for joining us this week, and we'll see you next week.